When a child goes into their well child checkup at 6 months of age now, they can get upwards to 8 different vaccines all in that one visit.
Guys, what is up? Welcome to our fourth episode of Dr. Ben Tapper's podcast. I am so excited and thankful to be sitting down with my hero of mine, Dr. Brian Hooker. He is the man behind the book Vaxxed and versus Unvaxxed. He is the man behind the new upcoming documentary called Vaxxed 3. I highly recommend you get out and see that film. But this podcast is all about things that are kept from the masses, whether it's censorship, shadow banning, whatever it may be, the things that the government doesn't want you to know about. But we are here to talk about those things, to bring light to the darkness. Okay, and truth is treason in an empire of lies. The three-letter organizations and the government and Satan himself doesn't want you to know about the things that we are talking about. So that is the goal behind this podcast, to be the light in the darkness and bring truth to the forefront. So like and subscribe. And again, this is not medical advice. This is just conversation and my opinions and our thoughts. So again, share this episode with a friend or a loved one and like and subscribe. God bless you guys, and tune in. To August of last year, nobody really knew who I was.
There's about 12 people who are producing 65% of anti-vaccine misinformation.
We need to come together as Americans and realize that we have a war at hand here. Right?
Like, dude, how scared of this shit do you have to be to be wearing gloves, a face shield, and mask at this point?
Help us to urge folks and say to them, look, it's time to roll up your sleeve and get the shot.
Chiropractor in Omaha, Nebraska, responsible for 65% of the anti-vaccine misinformation. Put what I say to the test. Just don't write me off as crazy misinformation.
Doctor, please bring yourself in order.
600,000 people will die of cancer. 300,000 people will die of obesity this year. When is enough enough?
Well, Brian, how you been, brother?
I'm very good. It's such an exciting time. So many wonderful things going on right now. And it's always good to see Dr. Ben Tapper. Oh my goodness. The last time I saw you, you had your family with you. It was so wonderful. I had some had a good visit at Defeat the Mandates LA. And you know, it was the first time I had an opportunity to meet you, and I just knew you from like the Disinformation Dozen. So I was sort of fanboying out.
Yeah, well, I've been a fan of yours for a long time. I mean, it's the feeling is mutual. So you've been a hero of mine for a long time. That's why I want to sit down with you today. Just you know, that Defeat the Mandates was that was the heat of COVID. Man, that was It was an interesting time, and with the mayor even kind of interfering with the traffic flow. I'm not sure if you were aware of that or heard about that, but there was a lot of drama with that. But there was a lot of people. I think we had 10,000 people there at one time.
Right. It was big. It was really, and my hat's off to Steve Kirsch for putting that whole event on, and there's so many absolutely amazing people at the podium, and then so many people coming out just to support. And I was just there to not wear a mask. I mean, that was the fun part, was like looking around and seeing everybody's beautiful face.
Right. And seeing smiles, and man, that was such a relief, wasn't it? Just a good outlet for people to meet. Yeah. So Brian, tell me some of the events that you've been at recently.
Let's see. I was at the I always blank with stuff like this. I was just recently in Austin, Texas, and I was filming an interview for Vax 3. Crummy commercial for Vax 3, shameless promotion. I'm really excited because I actually was on the Vax-Unvax, the Children's Health Event Vax-Unvax bus that toured the nation, and I was able to fly out for a few different stops, and it was so amazing hearing the stories. The subtitle of the movie is License to Kill, and some of the issues regarding hospital protocols, people that were exposed to ventilators, ICU units, remdesivir, and not to mention the COVID-19 vaccine. It was just recitation of horror after recitation of horror. So, and let's see, I was at several conferences this spring. I always blank on this stuff.
That's all right.
I was at the Autism Health Summit this fall, the Next Steps conference in Atlanta that's put on by Tia Severino, I believe was in March. And sometimes they tend to blur together. But the thing that's so amazing about the conferences is that I think it's so important to be able to be there and interact with so many people from our tribe. I
Amen.
always, I always get so encouraged. I get lifted up, built up, and even built up in the Lord. I mean, I think there's just really a spiritual component,
Amen.
and I get to interact with so many brothers and sisters while I'm there. It's so absolutely rich and amazing, and it's weird. I had kind of a desert of these events. I'm not really going to go to anything until MAPS, which is in September, and I miss it. I really, really do.
Brian, when is the vaccine summit this fall?
Uh, which
The
vaccine
autism summit.
summit?
I'm sorry, the autism summit.
The let's see, the Autism Health Summit that's put on by Tracy and Scott Schleplovic, and that is going to be next spring in San Diego.
Okay.
I think they've got a date for it already. I haven't checked their website. I believe it's April 2025.
I have to mark my calendar as well, dude. I'm super excited for Vax 3. So this one's going to be more of a COVID, kind of shining the light on COVID and the protocols.
Primarily COVID. I mean, I think that there's always a variety of stories.
Right.
And, when you're injecting toxins into the bodies of babies, children, teenagers, adults, you name it, this whole market value proposition is, basically $13 billion. I'm sorry, 13 million shots worth of a billion shots worth of pain and suffering. And so there's a lot of things to, they could probably make 10 Vax 3s based on, the information that was gained on the bus.
Right. I mean, it's so crazy to think back and look back during the protocols that were pushed. And not only that, but the incentives that the hospitals were given, they were not incentivizing health or, let's say,
Right.
desired outcomes. They were incentivizing death, and that's the real crime. When they are incentivizing death, that you can be sure that these hospitals, I mean, give or take, the doctors and nurses meant well, but they were given these protocols that were really incentivizing death, and that's the problem. And and so we need to be talking about this. So I'm thankful that you guys are doing a film on that and really keep telling that story, because it's vitally important. People need to know the truth of what happened, and so just with the craziness, I mean, there's so many things to tell about this story. We can talk about the faultiness of the PCR testing. We can talk about the protocols that were pushed. We can talk about how the mask and everything were pushed in to funnel in the vaccine, and how this vaccine now is on the childhood schedule, and the emergency use that was put into place to protect this vaccine and getting on the schedule. I mean, there's so much that we can talk about, and it's just really so much to unpack here. And, I just want to get your perspective and your story here in our short time today, because I know you're a brother, a brother in Christ, and you are one that has stood in the gap for a long time. You have a very powerful story and testimonial. I just want the people to get to know you, Dr. Brian. I want people to know your story and just kind of how you got into this fight in the first place.
Well, I started out very, very pro-vaccine and sort of arrogant, and I finished graduate school in 1990, and I did everything sort of in the proper sequence. I finished my PhD one year, got married the next year, and then it's time to have a kid, and so I had this sort of idyllic 4-bedroom house, 3-car garage life. And all of a sudden it's, this critter, my son, appears on the horizon in 1998. And I thought vaccines were really the best thing since sliced bread. I didn't really know that vaccine injury was even a thing. I think maybe conceptually I remembered some type of informed consent sheet, or something. But I was born and raised in a family where my mom was in charge of the distribution of all the vaccines in Riverside County, Southern California, which is about 2 million people. Well, it was about 2 million people at the time. And so, it was sort of in my blood. And I can remember when my son was being vaccinated, just being very, like, oh, we have to be on time, 2 months, 4 months, 6 months. But, Ben, he didn't really completely regress until later, but he wasn't right from the very beginning. And he got his hepatitis B shot, his first hepatitis B shot at 2 weeks of life. Then we did the whole series, and he got sicker and sicker and sicker. When he was about 6 months, he developed recurring ear infections. We got his 12-month vaccines, his live virus MMR and varicella vaccines. And then at 15 months, lo and behold, we had a case where he had an active ear infection. And we knew that because we had taken him to an ear, nose, throat doctor the same day that he was supposed to have his well baby checkup and get his vaccines. So we dutifully go from the ear, nose, throat doctor to the well baby visit. And the nurse practitioner is like, well, I've got the vaccines lined up. We're ready to go. And we're like, well, he's sick. Is that okay? Can you vaccinate a sick child? And we know he's sick because we had the ENT doc confirm it, and we're on our way to get antibiotics. And they said, no, we do this all the time. He's not that sick. He's running a low grade, he'll be absolutely fine. Well, he wasn't. He wasn't fine. And he underwent, what I now know was probably cytokine storm. He fevered for 18 days, kind of a low grade at first, but then when it spiked at 102 and 103, all of his milestones were lost. All of the, almost overnight, just very, very quickly. He stopped walking unassisted. I mean, and, in hindsight, it was like balance and gait issues that were happening because he was neurologically impaired by that particular incident, and really by all of the vaccines that led him up to his toxic tipping point at that point. And then at 18 months, then he was diagnosed with full-blown autism.
Oh my goodness. And how old is he now, Brian?
He is 26 years old. He is 26.
How's he doing now?
Well, he's still a non-speaker. He's nonverbal. We deal with medical maladies. He's got, a variant of Crohn's disease in his intestines. And so we have a gastroenterologist that specializes with autistic children. And we do everything. I mean, you do every intervention, regardless of whether they're 2 or 22. It makes absolutely no difference. So, we have a lot of docs that we work with specifically for him. But he has recently, he's been a speller, and he's done this modality called spellers for the last 3 years. And now he's able to openly communicate with us, as of February this year. I mean, it's really just like this new development. He can openly communicate with us, and he's all in there. It's everything. It was like it was just sort of buried for 26 years.
How rewarding is that to be able to communicate with him?
It is a miracle and a half. I mean, I've seen the miraculous before. I've seen people get healed before my eyes. I've seen miraculous apparitions and things like this. Yeah. This tops them all. This tops everything. My son is brilliant. Ben, I don't like to brag too much, and I don't want to take liberties with him because he gets embarrassed, but he's doing calculus.
Wow. And
we have no idea, like, we didn't do this. We didn't understand this. we kind of from a just sort of the, out exterior perspective, thought that he was severely developmentally delayed, but he's absolutely brilliant.
Takes after his dad, right?
And his mom, and it's weird. He's very, he's very emotional, and he was, we were, my wife and I were going through some of it, some of the things that he said because we record all of it,
Yeah.
the things that he spelled, and he was, he was talking about his insecurities, and my wife's like, "Where did that come from?" And I looked at her, and I said, "From us."
Yeah.
Like, imagine all of your insecurities and my insecurities jumping into one body. So we're learning all these wonderful, new, wonderful, sometimes challenging things about our son.
Yeah. I can't even imagine just not being able to communicate and then now having this avenue where you can communicate and you can, really in a way get to know what's on your son's mind and what he's thinking and just his capabilities and potential. I love that.
Right.
What a blessing that is. And I've heard of that spellers. For those that are listening, is this just like an app? It's an app, right, for them to be able to communicate and type.
It is sort of a movement. I recommend that people go to spellers.com. And they can learn a lot more. We have a practitioner that we work with down in San Diego. He uses actually a laminated letterboard that's just, basically a laminated piece of cardstock. It has alphabet on it on one side, math symbols on the other side, and he points and he spells out everything that he communicates.
Oh, that's amazing.
It's genius. The next step, hopefully for him, I mean, we want to make sure that we get the full meal deal and we don't get ahead of ourselves. But a lot of these kids then start to type and they can communicate online. They can communicate using an iPad, and it's a game changer.
Oh, 100% it is. I mean, I can see how that could be an absolute game changer. Well, I just am so excited for that and excited for you to just continue that conversation with
Well,
your son.
thank you.
Yeah. Well, Brian, just in the movement, in the vaccine realm, obviously we fight the great fight here, and it has been very burdensome. And I know you've been in this fight longer than I have, and I grew up in an unvaccinated family, and I put on vaccine workshops and lectures for a decade now, and it's we face a lot of persecution in this realm, and people need to understand that. And it's like, man, you look at the mainstream and they're going to say, oh, they write us off as loon and crazy, and we're just some crazy conspiracy theorist. Like, we don't have sound science on our side. I mean, in your field and line of work, how many testimonials have you come across in this fight? And what do you say to those who claim this is just this conspiracy?
Well, everybody has a story, and everybody that has experienced a vaccine injury has that story. And when you look at the compilation of stories and you bring them all together, then you get a scientific sample of individuals. And I've done, I really, I was trained in statistics as a part of my graduate work. I used statistics when I used to work at the Department of Energy laboratory. And so, when it came time to start to evaluate vaccine injury, there were so few people that were trained up in epidemiology to do it, that there were people like me that were like, there's a void in the literature. We need to do this. But you look at all of those stories, all those instances, and I work for Children's Health Defense. I head up the science department, and we're data nerds. We're always sniffing out, medical data that practitioners are willing for us to mine. And, we have access to part of the Florida Medicaid database right now. But when you look at this compilation of information, it's as plain as the nose on your face. Number one, that vaccines do cause injury at a very, very high frequency. That many of the ills that we accept as normal in society now, with a 54% chronic illness rate in our children, which is preposterous. It's unheard of. It's gone up, fourfold since the 1980s when it was about 12%. This is a catastrophe. But when you start to look at vaccines and vaccine injury, then these catastrophes make sense because of the bloated nature and all the vaccines that have been added to the schedule because of the liability shield of vaccine manufacturers. We've gone from just a handful of vaccines in the 1970s and 1980s, and now there are, literally 53 needle sticks by the time a child is 18. Over half of them happen in the first year of life. When a child goes into their well child checkup at 6 months of age now, they can get upwards to 8 different vaccines all in that one visit. They've never been tested together. So no wonder we're facing a national health catastrophe. You look at what we're doing and what we're, this rogue cavalier attitude to vaccines somehow being magical.
Right.
And we'll just add more and more without testing them.
Right.
It's absolutely preposterous. And when you look at the data in the face, it's very, very difficult. Sometimes I go home and I'm depressed because I look at, the level of injury and the level of deception that's going on around this.
Right.
It's very, it is very stark.
It's a spirit at this level, Ryan, it becomes a spiritual battle. I mean, and that's, I think, what you and I both understand, because it's like it becomes a religion at this point where people worship the vaccine. And look at COVID. I mean, they said there's nothing you can do naturally. I'm like, well, what about prayer? I mean, prayer has been clinically proven to have an improvement in outcomes. And so prayer is something we can do naturally. And, what does it say biblically during a pandemic? We should be clinging to the Lord. And,
Exactly.
And so this is why I feel like this whole thing is just under the umbrella of spiritual warfare. When people are so deceived at this level, especially our children. I mean, think about the conversation that we're having. I mean, you should feel that burden, and it is a heavy burden to carry. I mean, you are fighting the good fight. You are in the trenches. You are standing the gap. You are fighting for our children. I mean, you work for Children's Health Defense.
Right.
I mean, you are doing an honorable thing, and you're saving lives. You are saving children. You are fighting for, literally the health of our children, the lives of our children, and we have to cling to the Lord because He makes our burdens light, just like it says in Matthew. And so, I am very, I share that burden with you, and I think most of the people that are listening share that burden. So I just want you to remind you that you're not alone in this fight, Brian. And
Amen.
And the battle does belong to the Lord. I keep hearing that over and over and over, because again, we want to carry that burden and we want to fix it, but we're here to serve and do our part, knowing full well that God has the final say in this subject. And I believe that He is going to shine the light on this subject more and more as the days come. And so, on that note, Brian, what do you think about, I know we have a lot of work to do yet. Obviously, we have an uphill battle to fight with just the vaccine industry. But what are we up against here? I mean, I know we have that judge in Australia that just said, "Hey, Pfizer paid me off." That's basically. I don't know if you saw that article that was just coming out. But what are we up against here when it comes to just the powers that be? Not only just from a spiritual side, but just from the government and these three-letter organizations and the Vaccine Compensation Act. What are we up against here?
Well, first of all, we're up against, we don't war against flesh and blood. We war against principalities and powers in the spirit world and the darkness in the spirit world. Yes. And that's what we're warring against. That is and so I cannot emphasize more the work that you do on your knees. We need to pray. And we need to pray every day so these principalities and these strongholds can be torn down, because it is a spiritual force. And I think really without that, Ben, we're just anything that we do in the physical realm is really just batting against the air. But we need for people to wake up. And the encouraging thing, again, in the presence of one of the disinformation dozen who just, was called out of the government because he was spreading the truth so, so faithfully. We need to be able to continue to do that. And we are up against, this whole pharmaceutical, industrial slash government, slash oligarchy, megapoly that is really, really controlled by, very, very dark forces in the spirit world. And, it is daunting to do that. And, really, I wouldn't embark upon this fight if I didn't have the Lord. I know that he that's in me is greater than he that's in the world. And so, we know as believers who wins in the end. And that, I think, is a leg up. It is such a leg up because I do know that victory is coming. And, I may not be able to understand it and perceive it in my natural mind, but I do know that that's coming. And that really is a driving force for me every day. It becomes there's so many different entities. There are so many different layers upon layers. And, I've done things like beat my head against Congress, almost literally, especially like getting people to notice the CDC whistleblower story with Dr. William Thompson and getting somebody to allow him to testify, allow me to testify, even to sit down and have just a stinking meeting, with a congressional official and their legislative assistants. It's very, very daunting. One of the things, though, that is so encouraging is that Satan's a liar. Satan's not that smart. And he overplayed his hand with COVID. And so many, many more people are waking up. Many, many more people are understanding. And, you look at how many people question the vaccination schedule now in the United States, how many parents are actually, really questioning, is this worthwhile? Is this valid? It went from 4%. I've heard several different figures, 4% prior to the pandemic to anywhere between 20 to 30% after the pandemic. I mean, that's a huge increase of individuals who are now questioning, the entities that so horribly censored us and so horribly locked us down and took away our inalienable rights. I mean, that sticks. People learn, and many, many more people are now asking those questions.
Amen. The soil for truth is rich. And I think that's exactly right. I mean, well said, Brian. That's why I love you, brother. I mean, it's just like, people are starving for the truth now. COVID did overplay their hand. And and the one thing that I think that people, just during COVID, for me especially, when the vaccine summit of 2019, they took out "In God We Trust" and they put, "In vaccines we trust." I mean, I don't know if you remember seeing that, but it was, they literally took "In God We Trust" and they turned it to "In vaccines we trust." And, and then in the spring of 2020, the pandemic hit. And then we had, all these people, say that stay home. There was all this fear mongering being pushed on the television. And, I just even look at the word corona, I think crown, the meaning of crown. And then they lit up the Jesus Salvador, or I mean, the Jesus statue in El Salvador. They put "Vaccine saves" across the chest. I'm like, how blasphemous can we get? Right. And then you have,
goodness.
And then in Fauci we trust. You see all these different things like this coming across our way here. And then there was a big slogan, "Hope is on the horizon." And as a Christian, our hope is in Christ alone. And, when you see these taglines, these bumper sticker slogans, and it's in hope, and I read that, I think, yeah, if you were to show 100 Christians in a room, what does this mean? They're all going to say it's Jesus, right? It's Christ.
Right.
But it was in reference to the vaccine. And I just think that a lot of people were going along with it and rolling up their sleeves, but a lot of people, I think, saw right through it. Like this, it is, I need to sit back, and there is a check in my spirit here. And that's why it's vitally important we continue the fight that we do, the work that we do, because the time is now, and people are starving for it. So we have this bird flu vaccine now with Moderna. I mean,
Right. Getting tax dollars.
right. They're using our tax money, $176 million. And I believe it's an investment. This is an investment for them, and they're going to want a return on that investment. And we have to be, zoom out here at a 30,000 sky foot view. And, when they want a return on the investment, they're going to be sure to push, just like Paul Offit says, fear sells. They're going to really push this fear mongering campaign again. And when do you foresee this happening?
I think we're right on the horizon of sort of the bird flu pandemic. And it's just more of the same. We have Pfizer and Moderna who are now, addicted to profits to the tune of, over $54 billion for Pfizer, over $32 billion for Moderna. Moderna wasn't even a blip on the map before COVID. And now, we've got these junkies and they're trying to get their latest hit, their infusion of billions and billions of dollars. And so if they're opportunists looking for, the next opportunity to get down the road, and I sit and watch on social media, I've been intrigued by this. I'm not really, a social media geek. I don't like living out there, but I sit and I watch and I see these vultures that are opportunists, and some of them are like, there's an individual by the name of Rick Bright who used to work for BARDA, and he sits there like a vulture, talking about bird flu fear porn to the tune of the fact that he's got almost 20 patents on bird flu vaccines. And it's like, you know what? You're lining your coffers. You're a grifter. Get out of here.
Right.
And it is absolutely insane seeing, the cabal, the individuals that are so entrenched, in this whole world system now, that are salivating over the fact that something like bird flu could become zoonotic because of gain of function research, and could infect the population.
Brian, you just touched on gain of function. Why are people, you see this, there's a lot of people in the freedom movement that either don't really necessarily want to acknowledge the gain of function, or they say it's not really something we should be talking about, or it's not real. But, I look at, I don't know what necessarily to think of gain of function. I don't doubt that its existence.
Right.
But
right.
I think that they obviously it needs to be heavily investigated. And I do believe that, it's interesting to think that, how do you say it? When you look at the word virology, there's a lot of people that kind of argue about viruses and whatnot. But I think virology, the word virus means poison or toxin. And so viruses do exist in that regard. But this new virus that we're told that this isn't a droplet or it's just kind of airborne, I don't necessarily believe that. But I do believe that the gain of function is real. And if it is a real thing to study viruses in that lab, what kind of viruses are they putting out? Are they putting out toxins? Are they putting out poisons to poison the people and then come and bring in the cure? And that, to me, is a very evil industry, because they're trying to figure out and study what causes us to die or for us to get sick. And then they come in and bring the solution. It's kind of like the Hegelian dialectic, the problem, reaction, solution. And I also have questions about how ivermectin was helping people and hydroxychloroquine were helping people during COVID. So, and they're two heavy hitters for parasites. They're anti-parasitic medications.
Parasitics, right.
So is it gain of function parasitic in nature? I mean, are they putting out parasites for people? I mean, you're hearing all these things about parasites now. It just makes you wonder.
Really, it really does make you wonder. I mean, never underestimate, our own federal governments or the governments of the world to invent new, different, insidious types of evil. Some of them involve parasites. I'm of the opinion that there's strong evidence that things like Lyme disease, which is a tick-borne disease, is a bioweapon and probably escaped from one of the facilities like Fort Detrick that does gain of function research. When you look at what's happening with with bird influenza, what they're trying to do is to push it closer and closer to being infective in humans. So they use mice, then they transition from mice to ferrets. Ferrets have a very, very similar immunology to humans, and then they push it to human lung epithelial cells. They can't, ethically infect humans, although they have in the past. And there's direct records of that, through the Department of Defense, poor soldiers being, subjected to bioweapons. But then, the piece de resistance is, to be able to get this infective in humans, and all why? Oh, well, because we need the pathogen to get the vaccine. That's a bunch of hooey. That is absolute, complete nonsense. I've been following one of the smartest people that I know is Dr. Meryl Nass, and she's a real expert in bioweapons. And there's another Dr. Francis Boyle at the University of Chicago, good expert in bioweapons. And they've exposed these, and they've exposed the fact that these weapons do get out. They do cause. There are lab leaks. The lab that is sort of the cutting edge bird flu lab in the University of Wisconsin here in the United States has had 2 episodes of lab leaks that have been reported to the authorities and reported to the National Institutes of Health, and 2 safety incidences. And unfortunately, I think that some of these lab releases aren't necessarily accidental leaks.
Right.
And so I think, there's just so much, there's so much to unpack there. The take home message is that, I've been doing molecular biology and genetic engineering, since the 1990s. And people are using these methods, these methodologies, not for good, but for evil. And that is extremely unfortunate. Those that think that they're in that for the good, that, oh, well, we're going to develop the vaccine, saves the world, they need to take another look.
Right.
They really, really do. I've talked to people, that have been involved in this type of research, and they're like, oh, yeah, we have to do this to save humanity. And it's like, back up. You've been too myopic looking under a microscope for a long, long time. You need to back up and see what's really going on.
100%. So, Brian, is it okay if we dig a little bit deeper down some rabbit holes?
Oh, let's do it.
Okay, so I love conspiracies, and I love kind of going down those rabbit holes. And you just you said a key word here: genetic engineering and genetics are your thing, and you've been in the genetic world for a long time. So I have a theory that, we have like these ingredients like WI38, like Windsor Institute 38, okay, from
Right.
female cell line of a, female lung tissue. They call it an immortal cell.
Right.
Right. And so then
It's an aborted baby.
Yes, from the aborted baby. You have MRC5, which is a male cell line. Then you have HEK293, a male kidney cell. Then you have like Vax-2, which they use water bag abortions. And we have these ingredients that are manufactured. Vaccines are manufactured a lot of these in abortal fetal cell lines. So from like an epigenetic standpoint, my theory is that these abortal cell lines are causing this rise in gender dysphoria. And I think obviously there's social influences. I think there's governmental influences. I think there's, that are playing a role. But I also think from, looking at these ingredients and injecting them into a baby's developing nervous system at an early age can cause this gender dysphoria. Or I think it'll have an epigenetic influence. What are your thoughts on that?
My thought is that, I would not take anything off the table, because these things were done with so little knowledge of what was actually happening when they were being done. You take and, the things that we know about the genome and about genetics and about DNA in general are so vastly different than what was known when these abortions were taking place and when these fetal cells were harvested and when they started to be used, things like HEK cells, human embryonic kidney cells. So much more has known about the ability of DNA to incorporate new exogenous DNA intracellularly as sort of a mechanism of sometimes it's an immune mechanism, sometimes and sometimes these things will get incorporated from an immune system. But when you look at the genetics and the epigenetics of inserting exogenous DNA, which includes X and Y chromosomes, of which females don't have Ys. So why are we putting Ys in females? Males are single dose with X. Why would we want to double dose them with X? Why would you do that? I'm not familiar with all the scientific steps that it would take to then connect that with gender dysphoria. But backing up from a fundamental standpoint, I see a lot of just like confusion, hand waving, heuristics, and hubris in being able to and deciding that we're going to do something like that in the first place.
Right. This makes you wonder. I mean, I think in Genesis, like I just think of like the seed war. Is it in Genesis 3?
Yeah.
Something like that. I feel like it's almost like Satan is trying to tap into the genome, alter the genome, and get us away from how we were created in God's image, and really kind of alter that.
Exactly.
I think it's really interesting, but and you're seeing it. I mean, why are we seeing this explosion of these gender affirmation centers, these surgical centers all over?
Right.
You're seeing it all over.
Right.
I mean, look, when I was growing up, you never heard of such a thing. And I remember Pat from Saturday Night Live used to be a SNL skit.
Pat. I remember Pat.
Yeah, right.
Absolutely.
Right. And now
I was an accountant. Yes. Yes, I remember Pat.
I love it. You're Chris. Okay, I used to do a Pat impression.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I used to do a Pat impression. I'll stop. That was terrible.
Okay.
But it was, it was an SNL skit. Now it's everyday life. You're seeing it all over. I went to Jimmy John's here with my kids. We're traveling, and we go in there, and the guy behind the register, it looked like a woman. I mean, he was 6'4" and long blonde hair and had breasts, but then and he had a deeper voice than I did. And it's just like, we live in this world right now where there is a lot of confusion, and you wonder why. I know we have other influences, other ingredients out there. I mean, there was a pesticide, that was found to cause the sex change in frogs, and you're seeing.
We have so many endocrine disruptors in this sort of toxic soup that we're living in and breathing in. And, so all of that is pointing towards this sort of confusion and this sort of, the kind of Romans 1 worshiping the created instead of the creator.
Yes, right.
I see so much of that. And, and I don't point that out just because of gender issues. I point that out because of all of Romans 1, all of the fall of man, all of it. And, and I see us, deifying the created every day and deifying the created in terms of like humanism.
Right.
So rampantly. And then now, the next iteration, which I think is another dirty trick of Satan, is transhumanism.
Yes, right. I mean, it's really, it is going back again spiritually. It is such a spiritual warfare. On that note, Brian, what is your favorite book of the Bible?
Oh gosh, I really have a hard time not reading Acts.
Yeah.
I do. I just love it. It is so to me it's so pertinent to the church and to body life. And the church era is where we're in. I mean, we started out as God, with us. Now we're God in us. And you see the works of the Holy Spirit so, amazingly displayed in the book of Acts that, it's very, it's very enlightening. It's very encouraging, and it's very real. I mean, I love the disputes. Like, what was it, Paul and was it Paul and Silas or Paul and Barnabas? There was a big dispute, and then there was another dust up about John Mark and whether he was good or not and everything. And it kind of reminds me of like just normal church life,
Right.
and being able to take some of those imperfections but just embrace the perfectness of the Holy Spirit within us.
Right.
And so I'm sorry, I could go on and on about Acts because I just love it.
Yeah, well, I love it. I mean, I do a Bible study every Friday morning with some guys locally, and we're actually diving into Acts, so it's good. It's funny that you mentioned Acts. Um, well, Brent, I love our conversation. I mean, I don't want to end it just now, but I do want to just kind of ask you a couple more questions just about
Sure.
how this is, you know, spiritual and what people can do to just give people some encouragement in this time. And how do you find encouragement in this? Because I know it is a heavy burden, and those days where you feel depressed, days where you feel weary, just give us some encouragement in that area.
Really, I love being known, and it's interesting adulting, being an adult. And I'm going through this with my son because I can now communicate with him, and he can give me feedback. And he'll see me doing something, and he won't want me to do it or something. I was like, Steve, I'm folding the towels. That's adulting. I'm sorry, we got to do this now. um but being known and being in fellowship with like-minded individuals, with a body of believers. I'm so fortunate, to have such a wonderful family, and be planted into a local church that has an amazing men's group that, that is, it's an area where, of transparency. And, it is it's almost like an area of transparency and acceptance, under the umbrella of grace. I don't think that I would be very successful if I didn't have moments that I could be known, that I could really, I could look at somebody and say, you know what, this is happening. I'm really struggling with this right now. And it is, daunting beyond belief. And expressing some of those sort of fundamental fears, things that are wrong thinking, and having a brother listen to me, and just not maybe come forth with the word of correction. Oh, the word of the Lord says you suck, but just listen and sit with you in the pain or whatever. We live painful lives.
Yeah.
I mean, you see, and it's only gotten worse in society. It's only gotten worse in society. And so, to be able to have somebody that will sit with you, shoulder to shoulder, and sit in your pain, or you be able to sit in their pain, I think is just absolutely amazing. I think everybody needs that type of fellowship. Everybody needs to be built in. And of course, in a spiritual context, they're always encouraging you to be built in with the Lord. And which is absolutely fundamental. My concept, even around COVID, my concept of God changed so much.
Mm-hmm.
And I think became that much more intimate.
Mm. I would agree with that. I mean, I read during COVID, I mean, we had, our church, I was very active in the church, and, it closed down, and,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like preaching in my house, like pacing in my house. Just
Right,
like,
right.
this is not right. We shouldn't be doing this. And so it did change my perspective on a lot of things. I read Letters to the Church by Francis Chan, and I
Oh,
feel like,
wonderful.
and then I read the Letters to the American Church by Eric McTaxis. I feel like there are two books that everyone should be reading. And, and during Hitler's time, Dietrich Bonhoeffer was speaking out against Hitler.
Mm-hmm.
And, he was one of 18,000 pastors during Hitler's time. And 18,000 pastors, think about that, during Hitler's time. 12,000 pastors stayed quiet and compliant. They didn't want to buck the system. They didn't want
Right.
to, ruffle the feathers here. They just stayed quiet and they said, this is not our time or place to be speaking out. 3,000 of that 18,000 joined Hitler's regime, and the other 3,000 were like Dietrich Bonhoeffer. They were speaking out, and they were heavily persecuted for it. And I feel like as Christians, where do we be? Where should we be in this fight? Should we be like the 12,000? Should we be like the 3,000 that joined the regime? Or should we stand in the gap like the Dietrich Bonhoeffers of the day, at that time, and really stand in the gap and fight for what's right and stand up for injustices? And so again, changing my perspective during COVID, it absolutely changed my perspective. If anything, it really reassured that we're not called to be the sugar here, but we're called to be the salt and light of the earth. And so, Brian, I am so thankful for you. I'm thankful for our friendship, and I am just sitting here reminded by when I got called disinformation dozen, my life was in a whirlwind. Okay. I was kind of this small town chiropractor. I didn't really have any publicity. And I can't tell you how many thousands and thousands of people trying to reach out to me at that time. It was overwhelming. But I remember a time we actually did an interview, I believe, during that time.
Right.
And you prayed for me. And I will never forget that. And it was, you were someone I already looked up to in the movement, and I was kind of blindsided by your faith and your just encouragement, because it was exactly what I needed in that time. Someone that was already in the fight, someone that was standing in the gap already ahead of me. It kind of just reassured, like iron sharpens iron, a friend sharpens a friend, and you were that friend to me in that time. So God bless you, my friend. Brian, any final words here?
Well, I so appreciate that. And it's interesting that you talked about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and he was persecuted to the nth degree. He was hanged in April 1945, just weeks before the surrender of Germany in World War II. Oh, death, where is thy sting? If the worst thing that happened to me is that I died, I get to go to heaven. That would be awesome. I'd love to go to, not that I'm inviting death. Hello. But there are things that are worth dying for. There are, the gospel is the thing that is, that's the hill that I stand on. That's the hill that I die on. Saving children's lives is another hill that I die on. When we look and we see how distorted, how, what a sick society looks like. I mean, physically sick, mentally sick, emotionally sick. And, it's worth coming in and working for that every day, and experiencing, what I think it was Paul referred to, a light and momentary trouble, every day. It's really, really worth it. And when you put it in that perspective, the layers that COVID exposed in my life of like how much I really trusted the government, how much I really trusted authority, and even some of my impressions of authority and some of my visceral reactions to authority, I was really, really, I was grateful to be challenged in that particular way, because I felt like it was a refining process.
Right. So good. So good. And I can totally relate with that same feeling, Brian. Well, why don't we share with the listeners, Brian, where people can find you, and just put a plug in again for Vax-3 and where people can watch that, and when's it coming out?
Well, I really appreciate it. The best place to follow my information is childrenshealthdefense.org. If you scroll down, you can actually find a tab for the book Vax-Unvax that I wrote with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is the best writer and one of the most amazing friends I think I've ever had. He's the smartest guy I know. And then in terms of Vax-3, you can go to, I think it's Vax-3 the movie, or you can go to Children's Health Defense, and there is a tab for Vax3 or to go just to chd.tv, and there's a tab for Vax3, and it's coming out in mid-September.
Awesome. Brian, continue the fight, my brother. I think we'll be continuing to pray for you and support you. And
thank you so much.
yes, again, thank you so much for sitting down with me today. Love and appreciate you, my friend, and thanks for all your support and friendship, brother.
Thanks, Ben. Appreciate it.
To August of last year, nobody really knew who I was.
There's about 12 people who are producing 65% of anti-vaccine misinformation.
We need to come together as Americans and realize that we have a war at hand here. Right?
Like, dude, how scared of this shit do you have to be to be wearing gloves, a face shield, and mask at this point?
Help us to urge folks and say to them, look, it's time to roll up your sleeve and get the shot.
Chiropractor in Omaha, Nebraska, responsible for 65% of the anti-vaccine misinformation. Put what I say to the test. Just don't write me off as crazy misinformation.
Doctor, please bring yourself in order.
600,000 people will die of cancer. 300,000 people will die of obesity this year. When is enough enough?